are being persecuted, prosecuted, and imprisoned, including any anti-war expression by journalists, by human rights defenders, or common citizens who are using the internet to comment on the ongoing, for a 4th-year, war against Ukraine. Along with the foreign agent and undesirable organization laws, national security provisions are used as systematic tools of repression, combining stigma, penalties, and isolation. Human rights defenders, journalists, lawyers, and political opponents are systematically prosecuted, tortured, and silenced. Anti-war dissenters and activists are serving years in prison, not for crimes, but for courage. Political prisoners face not only lengthy imprisonment, but also denial of medical care. Solitary confinement is used against them, prolonged one. Navalny spent 396 days in solitary confinement as a punishment. Punitive psychiatry has returned as a tool against anti-war voices. 51 people forcibly subjected to psychiatric measures for their activism since 2022. Journalist Maria Ponomarenko, for example, was ordered to undergo compulsory psychiatric treatment for maintaining her anti-war stance even in prison. Crushing civil society and journalism continues and escalating. 1,040 individuals and organizations are now labeled as foreign agents, stripped of income, banned from providing education, and isolated. 245 organizations have been banned as undesirable, including the indigenous fund Batani, punished for engaging with UN mechanisms in reprisals against Russian civil society for engaging with the human rights mechanisms of the UN. Russia is the 3rd largest jailer of journalists worldwide. 50 are currently behind bars, some on espionage and treason charges. Out of them, 29 Ukrainian reporters. Journalist Olga Komleva was sentenced to 12 years for reporting on protests and the war against Ukraine. 4 other journalists received 5.5 years prison sentences simply for reporting on Navalny's foundation. Exiled Sakharov Center director Sergei Lukashevsky was sentenced in absentia to 8 years on accusations of spreading fake news about war crimes perpetrated by the Russian army. And by the way, where the banned now and destroyed Sakharov Center in Moscow, just recently, last month, in the metro station was erected a monument of Stalin with the children. Well, the Sakharov Center is now in exile, and its human rights leaders. Historian Yuri Dmitriev is serving 15 years while denied cancer treatment in detention, his health rapidly deteriorating, and this is the person who exposed one of the mass graves of the Stalinist repression, and then he received 15 years imprisonment for that. Because now the historical memory is being attacked by the government while distorting the historical truth about Stalinist and Soviet-era crimes, rewriting history. Extremism, terrorism-related charges, and nationalism is weaponized. Over 150 children are now branded extremists or terrorists, some tortured into confessions. Human rights defender Sergei Davidis was sentenced in absentia on accusations of justifying terrorism, following memorial recognizing detained Ukrainian Azov battalion members as political prisoners, just as a punishment. 85-year-old human rights defender Mark Cooperman was convicted of accusations of inciting terrorism and fined 500,000 rubles for his anti-war views and human rights work. He was facing more than 20 years imprisonment. Thank God for the publicity we gave to this case put the spotlight, he was just fined. An old human rights defender of the Soviet era, who is also who has a disability, and nevertheless, he's 85. He was facing 20 years and over imprisonment. Extremism laws are applied to Navalny's supporters, lawyers, and even journalists covering his work, even people who went to his funeral. LGBT people are criminalized under extremism designations. In 2024 alone, 13 cases were opened, and in 25 publishing houses were raided over LGBT-themed books. This includes the removal of art books and literature that reference LGBT experiences, including books by prominent, I would say, world writers Susan Sontag and Olivia Lang. They're banned. State-sponsored nationalism fuels discrimination and violence against women, LGBT communities, indigenous peoples, migrants, and minorities. And now, counter-terrorism and extremism laws are abused to punish speech, not danger. Former Deputy Alexei Gorinov's sentence for justifying terrorism was upheld in 25 for condemning the killing of Ukrainian children. Novelist Boris Akunin, who is present with us today in Geneva, and you will hear from several of these people at the special side event. Poland and Benelux and 39 other member states are holding at 1 o'clock, between 1 and 3 today at room 11. So Boris Akunin will be there, along with Nobel Prize laureate for literature, writer Svetlana Alexievich, whose books are banned from the school curriculum in Russia, and 2 journalists. One is Russian, Alsu Kurmasheva, who spent 9 months in detention. She was only released last August in the unprecedented prisoner swap. And a Ukrainian journalist from Radio Free Europe from occupied Crimea, who spent 4 years in prison on fabricated charges of espionage after being tortured to confess. He's also here with us today, and this event will be kindly moderated by the BBC Geneva correspondent Imogen Folks. So please come. It's open to journalists. Lawyers defending opposition figures are themselves prosecuted and imprisoned. 3 of Navalny's lawyers were sentenced on extremism-related charges in January 2025. Kaliningrad lawyer Maria Bonsler was detained on spurious charges of confidential cooperation with an enemy state, with a foreign state, facing up to 8 years in prison simply for defending politically targeted clients. The Russian ministry, and now about the war and the aggression abroad. As you know, I have always, from the very beginning of this mandate, stressed that there is inseparable link between the repression inside Russia and the aggression abroad, the ongoing war against Ukraine. These are 2 processes that are intimately connected. The Russian Ministry of Defense has enlisted foreign nationals now to fight in Ukraine, including trafficked persons from Nepal and Sri Lanka into the Russian army, coercing them into signing contracts through torture and threats to their lives and to their families. Following the legislative amendments in 2024, criminal suspects, accused persons and convicts, convicted prisoners, can have their sentences commuted or prosecutions dropped if they sign military contracts to fight in the war against Ukraine. In September 24, for example, a cannibal convicted to 25 years imprisonment was freed after fighting in the war against Ukraine and exonerated. Over 1,600, but maybe many more thousands, we don't know, Ukrainian civilians remain detained by Russian forces, majority of them deported to the Russian Federation and kept incommunicado in Russian prisons, with testimonies of torture, rape and killings in custody. Ukrainian detainees are being starved, tortured with electric shocks, raped and even tortured by doctors and medical personnel. At least 206 Ukrainian prisoners of war have died in Russian captivity, their bodies showing signs of torture. More than 19,000, and we don't know how many really, this is what the Ukrainian side, the Ukrainian government is saying, and the families of these children have 19,000 Ukrainian children have been forcibly deported. Fewer than 400 have been returned back to Ukraine. And now one of the kind of difficult to document, but the newest finding in this report, doctors and medical staff, Russian, have been directly involved or complicit in torture of Ukrainian detainees. I have documented this gruesome pattern firsthand by interviewing a number of former Ukrainian detainees who suffered torture in Russian detention, both civilian and prisoners of war. Ukrainian journalist Victoria Roshina was killed in Russian detention. Her body showed clear marks of torture and was returned to Ukraine only after 6 months in a body bag marked unidentified male with missing body parts. Civilian detainee Natalia Vlasova testified she was tortured by electric shocks, repeatedly gang raped by 15 armed men, and had her teeth filed down with a metal file. Yet the court ignored her torture and sentenced her to 18 years and 2 months in prison on terrorism-related charges. Irina Danilovich, another Ukrainian civilian detainee, a medical professional and a journalist, a citizen journalist, abducted in 2022 from Crimea, occupied Crimea, is now in prison for 7 years, denied medical care despite severe pain and risk of long-term harm. And these civilian detainees, women and men, are rarely returned through the prisoners of war exchanges between Russia and Ukraine. Very limited amount of them have ever returned because there is no mechanism for that. And now call for action. I will be calling today to the member states, of course to the Russian Federation, but also to the member states of the international community. It's clear that justice inside Russia is unattainable. Perpetrators enjoy total impunity. The international community must use universal jurisdiction and international mechanisms to prosecute torture and other serious crimes in their countries. Support for independent media, human rights defenders and civil society inside and in exile is urgently needed, including safe relocation and protection from refoulement. Recently, 50 Russian asylum seekers from the United States were deported back to Moscow. They were waited by the security services, many of them tortured, questioned, and then they're all in detention. Create an official and effective international mechanisms for the immediate and unconditional return of all deported Ukrainian civilians held in detention in the Russian Federation, including the deported children, regardless of the status and outcome of any peace talks, with due involvement of the International Committee of the Red Cross. I think this point is extremely important because regardless of the peace talks, the Ukrainian civilian detainees who are held without charges, without trial, might not return back to Ukraine. Similarly, all Russian political prisoners have to be released. And the Ukrainian and Russian civil society, as you probably know, unprecedentedly are running already, I think, for the whole year in 2025, a joint campaign called People First. And they will be advocating at a close briefing for member states again on the 24th, together, the Russian Memorial and the Ukrainian Center for Civil Liberties. They will be advocating for both the release of the Ukrainian civilian detainees, but also the release of the Russian political prisoners who are in prison for the only crime of voicing their opposition against the war against Ukraine. I'm sorry it might be longer, but at least I outlined to you the main points of the report. I hope you have the report in front of you. I'm ready for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. The Special Rapporteur will now take questions. We'll start with the journalists in the room, and then we'll move on to those online. Please state your name and organization before asking a question.
Yeah. Thank you. Nina Larson with AFP. Thanks for this briefing. I have two questions for you. I wanted to ask you about the medical personnel who are taking part and condoning torture, according to your report. So this is a new phenomenon that you discovered with this report, and I'm wondering if you see it increasing, and also if it is impacting Russians in addition to Ukrainian prisoners of war, or if you've only seen it impacting Ukrainians. Sorry, and then the second issue I wanted to ask you about was whether you've seen a shift in rights abuses in Russia since Putin was invited to Alaska and also to Beijing. We've seen significantly increase in attacks on Ukraine and also incursions into neighboring countries. Is it also translating into a more brazen approach at home? Thank you. More brazen approach when it comes to rights abuses in Russia.
Right. Page 20 of my report is outlining just a few examples of the individual cases of Ukrainians who were tortured by doctors, or they witnessed how torture happened to other detainees by doctors, by nurses, by medical personnel. You know, it is a new phenomenon in a sense that there was a hearsay that doctors have been involved, nurses and medical personnel was present, but there was no real facts and findings. And I put a lot of effort in this in order to find the individuals that would testify to me and my team about what happened to them. And then I put a lot of effort to find more testimonies already existing because a volume is needed as well. I wanted to see whether this is widespread and systematic. And in some prison colonies, which I'm giving as an example, Mordovia is one of them, in Republic of Mordovia in Russia, but others as well, because Ukrainian prisoners of war have been returning through the prisoner exchanges en masse, I mean, in bigger quantity. There are at least 50 testimonies, but there are many more, speaking about the same experiencing of torture and witnessing of a particular medical doctor, which the detainees called Dr. Evil. He's not a doctor. He's actually kind of not a qualified doctor, but not a nurse, but there is Feldscher, a paramedic, sorry, thank you. He is a paramedic, although he was the one in a doctor's role who was supposed to be the hired doctor in this prison colony. So despicable torture for punishment, refusal to provide medical care, but also examples of doctors who were checking while the detainee is being tortured and advising the Russian army or security service FSB where to apply the electrodes during electric shocks treatment, or saying, oh, stop because he's gonna die if you continue. Measuring the torture, being present in the room. Also, as a matter of routine, Russian doctors and nurses being silently present while the prison guards, it's called priyomka, when the detainees are entering the prison colony, they're subjected to ill treatment just as a sport or as showing them their place. From the moment they leave the prison buses to enter the prison colony, the prison staff is actually on two sides. They form something like a corridor and start beating heavily the detainees while entering the prison colony, after which they're starting a routine procedure of medical checks or enlisting them in the prison colony. This is all accompanied by torture. And I've heard from a number of detainees that medical personnel was quietly waiting to then measure the height and the kilograms, the weight of these detainees, while before that, in the same room, they were watching how they've been severely beaten or tortured with electric shocks. So the complicity, on one hand, by being silent witnesses of the doctors and medical personnel, but not only that, their direct involvement in torturing detainees is what's absolutely new for me. And one of the most striking examples, I spoke to this guy. He's still in hospital facing, I don't know, third operation, I think. This is Andrei Pereviezev. This is a Ukrainian man from the east of Ukraine, born in Kharkov, in a small village outside Kharkov. And as you know, this is the bordering with Russia region. I asked him, do you speak Ukrainian? How would you like to speak? I don't speak Ukrainian, but during the interview he said, I don't speak Ukrainian that well. We all speak Russian because we're, from Kharkiv region. This man was called in to the Ukrainian army. He went to fight in the war to defend their country. He was, wounded, and this is the way he was taken prisoner of war. And then a Russian doctor who actually was sent visiting temporarily. He had his stint from Moscow. So a sophisticated doctor from a capital of Russia hospital started operating on him, not immediately. They waited for about, 32 hours. First interrogated him, tortured him with electric shocks. Another medical personnel was present while he was tortured. And then the doctor had to operate to keep his life. He did a good job. The surgery was perfect. But when the guy woke up, he saw that there is extra bandages on his stomach. And this Russian doctor has burned with a medical tool, "Victory, Glory to Russia," on his stomach. And I have these pictures, and he showed it to us during the interview. And the letter Z, letter Z, which is now metaphorical in Russia for support of the military operation. Why did he have to do that? But he did the surgery well. He did his medical job well, and then he did that. On helpless man who was under anesthesia. This is one very striking for me example of such brutality, almost like schizophrenic. They do their medical job or they measure the height and the weight of the people, but it doesn't matter. They're tortured. They silently watch or they participate. Yes, I wanted to expose that, and it is in my report now, for the first time. The second question about whether Russia's repression inside the country has escalated since Alaska. I mean, from what I can see, there was from news that there was even worse drone and bombardment attacks to Ukraine since Alaska. What I can see, of course, as anybody else, is the one day ago the Russian planes in Lithuanian space or Russian drones heading for Warsaw. I mean, in terms of the repression inside the country against human rights defenders or journalists, it's already so high. It's already so high and so brutal that I don't think in several weeks it has dramatically increased. I mean, it's like almost like business as usual. Every day we receive information about another journalist or writer or activist or just a common citizen who is commenting on Bucha or commenting on war crimes by Russia in Ukraine on social media, who are being prosecuted. But also now they have invented a new tool, and this is what my second thematic report in the General Assembly is about. It will be a zoom in. It also contained it in this report, but I'll be zooming in for the General Assembly on the issue of the abuse of national security legislation, treason, espionage, confidential cooperation, and public safety legislation like terrorism, counter-terrorism, counter-extremism legislation. All of these laws that exist in many countries of the world and have to actually go after real terrorists and extremists and treason, espionage, spies, they're instrumentalized to silence dissent and particularly anti-war expression in Russia. So actually it's a conveyor belt, you see. LGBT people sentenced for being extremists, indigenous organizations, national minority. The Supreme Court of Russia pronounced one after another the LGBT movement, whatever that is, as extremist, and the so-called separatist movement with its 172 affiliates, first as extremists, and then they put them in the list, 172 organizations on the list of terrorists, which carries all the prosecution of heavy sentences for terrorism up to 20-25 years or life imprisonment. So, you know, I don't think in several weeks I could measure the pulse of after Alaska something dramatically changed. I think it dramatically changes every day. I mean, it's really, I'm shocked because I thought, well, now they demolished, they dismantled the civil society, torture as usual, impunity as usual. Where else could you go from here? Clearly, they haven't reached the rock bottom yet in the repression at home and the imaginative tools on the occupied territories and during the war against Ukraine, against civilians and, you know, POWs.
Thank you, Special Rapporteur. Is there another question in the room? Otherwise, we'll move to those online. Thank you. Laurent?
Yeah, thank you for the press conference, Laurent Siro, Swiss News Agency. I'd like to jump on what you said about the recent dozens of deportations from Russian opponents and human rights defenders from the US. Have you observed an increasing trend of these deportations since the arrival of Donald Trump at the White House? Because it seems that it was already the practice under the Biden administration. So has it speed up since the arrival of Donald Trump? And do you have any indications of other countries that might have had the same behavior against the Russian human rights defenders and opponents? Thank you.
You mean the deportations, right? That's your question.
Yes. Exactly.
The trend of deportations in your...
From third countries of Russian opponents to Russia.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I haven't been you know, intimately investigating the the deportation of the 50 Russian asylum seekers, among them